I'm Kurt Wagner.
And I'm Mike Epley.
We're old college debate teammates who disagree about pretty much everything as often as possible.
In each episode, we examine a question inspired by the week's events.
Despite our disagreements, we're friends. We respect each other, we keep each other honest, and we have fun doing it.
And most importantly, we drink.
Offering a fresh, informed snapshot of the debates that dominate contemporary discourse, this is Right Brain, Left Brain. So, if Boston is like a dick tip, like you say, well, why did they choose the loser name of fucking Boston instead of just calling it dick tip Massachusetts?
Well, you know, Massachusetts is kind of a Native American word for dick tip. Do you know what it translates to?
Are you fucking serious?
Yeah. It translates to sacred hill, which kind of is, you know.
I thought a sacred hill is where you put the dick tip.
I could call. And we're back.
Obviously, we've been gone for a few weeks. If you're following either of us or the show's accounts on social media, you've probably read the updates on our little hiatus.
Yeah, but if you're like me and you've realized that social media, particularly Twitter, makes life measurably worse, you may have missed the updates and wondered what the fuck is going on.
So why were we gone? Well, there have been a lot of fan theories floating out there. Did we pull a Kyrie and LeBron? A Big Boy and Andre 3000?
A Jon Snow and Ygritte?
A Professor X and a Magneto? No, not at all. A bunch of rough, unexpected, and, you know, stuff that is unrelated to the show came up, and it was a load of shit that was just dumped in the laps of both of us, and it disrupted the shit out of our personal lives.
True. So without going into any details, let me put it this way. Imagine you're driving your car and a big fucking brick just flies through your windshield out of nowhere and you crash your car. Now you have a brand new problem and a bunch of work that you have to do just to get back to normal. Between the two of us, you'd think we were driving behind a brick truck through Bricktown. You don't want to hear the details. Suffice it to say, it was a rough patch for both of us, and we just did not have enough resources between us last month to deal with the brick and produce the show.
You know, I can really relate to your analogy because one of my pastimes is driving around in a truck full of unsecured bricks.
Yeah, behind other trucks.
Yeah, and then braking suddenly in front of cars and trucks. And then watching what happens and then just looking at those people and saying, man, what's that like?
Guess I'll never know.
But look, we really have missed the show and our listeners terribly. We're super thrilled to be back in the studio. We hope you're able to catch up on some of the past episodes you may have missed when, you know, you were out there dealing with your own bricks through the figurative windshield of life.
Yeah.
We salute you. Life fucks with you. And, you know, what do we do when life fucks with you here at Right Brain, Left Brain? Well, just like any good Americans, we sit down with a good friend / political enemy, have a few drinks, and argue about Joe Biden.
All right, let's get into it then.
Yeah, so welcome to Right Brain, Left Brain, the champagne of podcasts.
This episode of Right Brain, Left Brain is brought to you by way of, you guessed it, North Coast Brewing Brother Thelonious Belgian-style Abbey Ale, which has been my beer of choice.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
If you assumed that we would be eating Hot Pockets, you'd be right, because we're having them.
Also, we got what? Crown Royal, we got Fireball, we got blah, blah, blah IPA. I got a mug filled with water. The mug says Crater Lake. And, of course, we've got the green stuff.
Yes, we've got good old Mountain Dew on tap.
That's right. Hey, thank you to our listeners who either love us enough to wait with bated breath for our return or, like me, are too lazy to click unsubscribe.
That's one of the best parts about not being memorable is that you forget that we're not there once we're gone.
And a big thank you to our Patreon subscribers, including 2 new subscribers over the hiatus who have signed up at the renowned rhetorician level. That would be Kiara Schlegel, who was actually one of the first people a while back to suggest that we cover Medicare for All. And Medicare for All has been our most listened to episode to date. So thank you, Kiara. First for subscribing, but also for giving us great show ideas. And then also Joseph John Wagner, who, Kurt, you want to take this one?
Is my uncle. Which just goes to show you that family is the most valuable thing in the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
But don't worry, Patreon subscribers. You have a brand new Patreon special episode waiting for you at patreon.com/RBLBpod.
Yeah. It's called Should Donald Trump Have to Release His Tax Returns? In that episode, you can hear Right Brain Kurt argue why Trump should release his tax returns. And you can hear Left Brain Mike argue why he shouldn't have to release his tax returns. It's a weird, awesome episode where we both go against the grain of our political allies and still manage to disagree with each other.
God forbid we come together. It's awesome, but you can only find that episode on Patreon, only at patreon.com/RBLBpod. That's patreon.com/RBLBpod.
P-O-D. I feel so alive. P-O-D.
Yeah, no, that's good. But that just reminds me, that just really goes to underscore that we need some sort of jingle. Some sort of old school advertising jingle. By the way, if you were wondering why I got tripped up on that thing a minute ago where it says RBK, like I'm like, RBK, is that like HBK, Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, my hero? And I just couldn't get past it. I'm like, who's RBK?
So what's going on in the world? Well, the trade war with China is heating up. That's Trump's trade war, of course. That has jostled a roller coaster stock market into roller coaster action.
Yes. And Montana Governor Steve Bullock became the 22nd Democrat to officially throw his presumably blue hat into the ring and officially announce that he is running for president. And it is expected that soon, perhaps after you've heard this recording already, that Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, will announce that he is officially running and become the 23rd Democrat to officially be entered into the race.
Lucky number 23. What else? Former Obama Vice President Joe Biden is surging in polls of likely Democratic voters.
And that brings us to the topic of the day. Today we are discussing the civil war within the Democratic Party, which as a Republican, I hope will kill many, many more central characters to the story than the Avengers movie, who unfortunately all those people came back.
Hey man, spoiler alert.
I've never seen an Avengers movie.
Oh, okay. So
I just know what happens because I read the comics and these things get out there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Everybody knows that Spider-Man's coming back. I mean, give me a fucking break.
Right. They're like, okay, we're not going to make any more money off of Spider-Man. And then it's like, okay,
kill them all.
But it's like 2 weeks later, they released another Spider-Man movie. So it's like, well.
Yeah. But that brings us to the topic. Should the Democrats go left or center? So what's up with it?
Well, the Democratic field is arguably more or less set. The candidates are already giving out speeches designed to set them apart from other Democrats in the race. Popularity polling and likeliness of votes for candidates are heating up. Former Vice President Joe Biden is currently enjoying a comfortable lead, with polls of likely Democratic voters preferring him about 30% of the time, which is about 10% higher than his closest rival, Bernie Sanders. The other numbers are split among the myriad number of other candidates who, as they continue to drop out, will go somewhere, who knows.
Yeah. If we assume that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden stay at the top of the field, which is a big assumption because it's kind of early and
it's very early. We haven't hit the first primary. Nobody's dropped out yet, you know. So we haven't had a single person drop out yet, and more people keep coming in.
Yeah. But if we just kind of think of them as opposite ends of the political spectrum on the left, which they kind of are, the differences between them will be drawn in sharp relief in the coming months. Biden was part of a left of center Obama campaign of hope and change back in 2007 that famously beat out more centrist Hillary Clinton in the primary and went on to win the 2008 election. But some things have changed in the Democratic Party in the last 12 years since that happened. In 2008, the largest voting bloc on the left was the baby boomer generation, who tend to have more centrist values.
In 2020, the largest voting bloc on the left will be millennials, who are on average far to the left of the average 65-year-old Democrat. So how does this gulp reveal itself in the field of candidates? In order to understand that, let's look at what the popular policies are and which candidates like them.
So some things that are considered to be center left are things like fixing Obamacare but maintaining it, progressive but less top-heavy tax plans, continued military dominance and aggressiveness,
pivoting away from identity politics. There are a lot more centrist Democrats who are okay with corporate political intervention and special interest groups, which as a Republican, I like. It makes me very, very aroused. They're not really super reform oriented, and they're more concerned with practicality and national reunification, and whatever urges that they have to push the political dialogue to the left are definitely more moderate and more interested in making consolidated long-term gains for leftism rather than rapid advances that rock the country.
Yeah. So some of these centrist candidates include Joe Biden,
Amy Klobuchar. Tulsi Gabbard is sometimes thrown into this category depending on who you ask. Sometimes some people say she's far on the left. I believe it was John Hickenlooper. Mm-hmm. That guy will drop out very soon, but he's definitely much more of a centrist.
Yeah.
And that also includes, people like outside of the Democratic Party, that Howard Schultz guy, the Starbucks guy who
Schultz.
We clowned on quite a bit in past episodes. Go listen to them. We dunked on, the jokes were pretty good.
Yeah. But then things that are in the conversation that are considered to be more to the left are things like advocating to get rid of Obamacare and replace it with Medicare for all, hard push to legalize marijuana, higher top marginal tax rates, public funding for colleges and trade school, even total student loan forgiveness in some cases.
Far left positions also include overturning of the Citizens United ruling and generally putting more prohibitions on corporate speech than ever, enacting serious gun control, whether it's through legislation or through executive action. And, of course, the infamous Green New Deal, which is famous depending on who you ask and not infamous necessarily. We debated that. We have an episode on it.
Oh, yeah, check it out. It's awesome.
It's one of our best rated episodes. Go listen to it.
Yeah.
And, candidates on this far left spectrum include, Bernie Sanders himself, Kamala Harris, depending on whether or not she's pretending to acknowledge that she was a cop, Cory Booker, and, others.
Some others, yeah. But those are the top names. So I don't know, Kurt, on the right, from the outside perspective, what do you think is the direction that would be more likely to defeat Trump?
Well, I think that if you guys nominate a centrist who does not have a record of being creepy with women and girls, you have a better shot of winning at 2020. If you go hard left and nominate the Mondale or the Dukakis 2.0 and you get the 1984 or 1988 electoral map, this is a center right country, and you're not going to win by going hard left, and you never have.
Well, okay. All right. Well, I hear you, but I disagree. My thought on it is that the right-left binary... Well, my first thought is that the right-left binary itself is fake, and it's made up, and it unnecessarily boxes people on a spectrum that doesn't really exist, and that the candidate that can best transcend that binary by addressing people's actual concerns on the right and left will win. What I think is interesting, though, is that I believe that the policies that will do that transcending happen to be labeled currently as far left policies. I'll talk more about that in my main argument.
All right. Well, I hear where you're coming from, my friend. And you know what? I think that if we're going to have to listen to each other talk anymore, then some sauce will lubricate that listen hole all the better, and the speaking hole.
I couldn't have said it better. Cheers. Whew. Man, how about that most recent episode of Game of Thrones? You didn't see it, but boy, I'll tell you, it sucked. Don't at me. Or do. I don't care. I won't log on. Okay. Ready.
So a lot of our friends on the left are interpreting things that they see as sincere demonstrations of this country moving to the left in a way that it's never moved before. I think there's a lot of important warrants that run counter to that fly in the face of this analysis. So the first warrant is Trump's 2016 election and the fact that he won against the predicted, presumed, and preordained Hillary Clinton, who everybody was like, even myself, even a lot of Republicans, arguably even Donald Trump was sure Clinton was going to win, right?
Air quotes won.
Yeah. My second warrant is that Barack Obama did not win because he swung hard left. He actually played an extremely moderate role to shoehorn otherwise specific, calculated major policy reforms. Like for everything that he would sort of put out there that when he was a candidate that was kind of pushing it more to the left, he did more than ever to appear a centrist and to embrace other centrist platforms that sort of shored that up. And then that helped smooth and shoehorn that in as like an acceptable extension. I mean, he definitely moved things to the left, that's for sure. But he didn't just come out as this hard swinging leftist like Bernie Sanders is doing. Barack Obama gets his reputation for being a hardcore leftist after he changed tack when he won re-election in 2012 and started having to especially deal with fighting against an obstructionist Republican legislature. But that's a whole other podcast. We've done the episodes on that. Go listen to them. They're really good. My third warrant is how there were as many things that you could point to that are comparable in 2004 that had a lot of people on the left thinking that John Kerry was going to win then. And then surprise, surprise, like he lost. He lost by a lot. Not
that much.
My fourth warrant that I want you to consider is the success of Bill Clinton because of his lack of belief in anything besides the success of the Clintons.
What?
His instincts led Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton to embrace any moderate or conservative position as long as it helped their popularity. And it worked. Bill Clinton could have sensed that especially when he was in the most trouble and he needed to reach for political capital, he reached for the center and not for the left. And that's where you see the greatest successes of Democrats in the post-Reagan era. And, I think that if we get more into history and even getting into that Reagan-Bush era, there are lessons that we can cull from that help reinforce this. So Reagan beat the shit out of Walter Mondale after beating the shit out of Carter, like with electoral maps that are famously like one-sided and slanted. Same thing with the elder Bush and Dukakis. I think it's also funny that the phrases elder Bush and Dukakis are still put together like that. And if you have a juvenile sense of humor like me, that's still really funny. All right, it's not funny at all. I'm just a child. Anyways, I think a lot of our friends on the left are also over-analyzing opinion polls that only have limited sampling and pop culture figures making broad statements that are similar to, pop culture figures in any era. And they're over-analyzing their emphasis, their importance, and their uniqueness. And that, like, when we actually look at the substance of candidates, besides their partisan leanings and besides socio-cultural trends, like, it matters a lot what roles people had before they were a presidential nominee, like, in terms of, like, their job. So what I'm getting at is that most presidents are, like, elected from state governorships or previous executive positions, like the vice presidency or some other cabinet position. There are, like, fluke junior senators like JFK and Barack Obama, who have sort of created this like excess.
Flukes.
They are. The only thing that's less of a fluke in that category is the current president, Donald Trump, who is the only person not to have government experience that we've ever elected, right? And before that, the only smallest category that presidents came from was the legislature. There have actually been very, very few members of Congress who have come directly from the legislature into the White House. A lot of these people that are on the hard left that you guys are banding about don't have that kind of background. I think this is one of those things that leads our friends on the left to frequently underassess how unviable, unlikely, and exceptional direct election is from Congress at all, right? Just because, you see somebody that's flashy, you see somebody that captures, your emotional sentiment. And I'll admit, Bernie Sanders has done amazing things in his time, but, he didn't clinch it, right? And even that is just a flash in the pan, Even when you get it right and you get a far left governor, and it's pretty rare that you end up being the governor of a state and you're also far left. But when you do get that kind of thing, you get a personality who is viable enough to win 270 electoral votes like Jimmy Carter did, only when you're running against like an extremely unpopular Republican president, like even less popular than Trump. He's going to perform much more like a Ronald Reagan against a Jimmy Carter type. You know what I'm saying? In this era, I think that he's going to have that electoral impact. I don't think that, especially when you consider, again, like, Bernie is your main guy that we're talking about here. For all of his time in the Senate, the man has not had a lot of legislative accomplishments to run on. He's got a lot of good personality traits that I think will help him do good against somebody like Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, he's going to have a lack of accomplishments to stand on, and Trump's going to eat that up.
Trump's going to have so many.
Yeah. He's going to have so many names. I mean, look, getting back to my points, like, people hated the Carter presidency so much that it shifted the entire electorate far enough to the right to give GOP presidents like a huge electoral mandate. And that pushed the country even further for like 12 more years after that. And so that's what I'm saying is like, even when you get your rare Jimmy Carter type and he actually gets in, he's still too far to the left to actually make any consolidated gains that you guys can hold on to. So what I'm saying is if you want to push the country further left and nominate Bernie or Cory Booker or, you know, Pete Buttigieg, like keep it up and make America great again by nominating these people and guaranteeing that Donald Trump has the same kind of electoral success that Ronald Reagan had, please. But if you want to win, if you want to actually upset me, nominate a centrist, nominate somebody who has a chance of beating Trump. I don't even think it's Biden necessarily, but I do think you guys need to clinch onto like a really strong moderate, like a governor, like that governor who I mentioned earlier that's not going to win and he's going to drop out very quickly. You guys won't nominate him because he's... No, not Hickenlooper. It was the other guy, the 22nd loser, the guy before de Blasio.
Oh, fuck, I don't remember.
Steve Bullock.
Some random.
I just said he's a loser, and he is, but he's the governor of Montana.
Some random 2020.
Yeah. and honestly, he's never going to get the nomination from you guys, but he's the kind of guy that he would be way more competitive in the general against any of your far left candidates, I do believe. But he'll never get there, just like how Bill Weld is more preferable to a lot of people on the left, but he's not going to beat Donald Trump in the Republican primaries as his only challenger.
You sound like a guy who would have, if you were a Democrat, thought that Jim Webb had the best chance of beating Donald Trump in 2016.
I do believe that. So that's an interesting question. Like, so do you think, like, do you honestly, do you think if it was Jim Webb versus Donald Trump, don't you think that Jim Webb would at least have a better would like throw him into this hypothetical race that already exists right now? Let's say he's number 24.
I gotta say it's hard to say because Jim Webb was a genuine, and I don't say this lightly. He was a Republican in Democrats' clothing. He was like, I'm a Democrat, but every single thing I care about is just verbatim the Republican platform. But that being said, I mean, maybe. I do kind of think that almost anybody except Hillary Clinton could have beaten Donald Trump. But I also think that Bernie Sanders would have beaten Donald Trump. Anyway, yeah, let's drink and then let me dissect and disintegrate your bullshit argument.
Okay. Cheers. That's what I like is my arguments being disintegrated.
You're in the right place, my friend. All right. So let me start this out by saying that I believe that right brain Kurt here is trapped in the two-party mindset and that it is the wrong way to think. Things like breaking up monopolies, progressive taxation, investing in public lands, protecting the environment, investing in infrastructure, setting up publicly funded social safety nets. In the modern political climate, all of the things I just listed are policy orientations that are pigeonholed as, quote, far left by conservatives. But these are all popular, non-tribal, non-partisan ideals, and many of them have been most famously implemented by Republicans. Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, and he massively increased business regulations. He broke up monopolies. He established the fucking FDA, and he massively expanded the national park system because he was a hardcore conservationist. But it's not just old school peeps like Teddy Roosevelt who care about these kinds of policies. You also have former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, who passed Romneycare, which is the precursor, who laid the groundwork for Obamacare. Now, those are just a couple examples. I could go way down the list and give way more examples of Republicans doing things that are pigeonholed as far left or liberal now, but I don't think I need to. I think that all of our listeners understand that some of this stuff has, at least historically speaking, been nonpartisan type stuff. I agree with Kurt on the basic principle that the Democrats are going to have a better chance of winning in 2020 if they come up with policies that appeal to more than just far left millennial communists.
Boo.
I agree with that sentiment. But the secret is that many far left policies that are being pushed now appeal to conservatives too, because they're not actually leftist policies. They're just good policies that will benefit everybody, arguably. So let's look at Medicare. As popular as Medicare is, Medicare for All, as the proposal, is also enjoying majority support in this country. Medicare for All has 70% support and growing, even though conservatives try as hard as they can to pigeonhole it as a far left policy. 62% of Americans want the government to take action on the environment, according to a recent Gallup poll, and that's the highest figure since 2006. Conservatives want to pigeonhole environmentalism as being far left. 61% of Americans support full-scale legalization of marijuana, including right-brain Kurt here.
Yes.
And that includes...
Legalize me.
That's right. And that includes 54% support in the Republican Party for legalization of marijuana. And yet, a lot of conservatives want to pigeonhole that as a far left policy. See where we're going with this? On taxation, a recent internal poll, and taxes are a big one, where the leadership in the Republican Party and the constituency are completely divergent on taxes. A recent internal poll by the Republican National Committee, where they only polled Republicans, found that only 44% of Republicans approve of the past GOP tax plan, while 45% of Republicans oppose that tax plan. More Republicans said fuck no than said bring it on to the Republican tax plan. And
Fucking
that's
rhinos.
and that's a poll among Republicans. Meanwhile, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called her own proposal to raise the top marginal tax rate to 70%, quote, radical. And yet that proposal alone is still supported by nearly 60% of Americans, including conservatives. So, in conclusion, a majority of Republicans want to invest in public education. They want to tax the wealthy. They want to invest in infrastructure. They want to smoke weed legally. They want to expand gun control, which is another big one that conservatives don't like to admit is true. They want to expand Social Security, which is another, and they want to make healthcare free or cheap.
Fucking disgusting.
The Democratic platform does not need to move right. The Republican platform needs to start reflecting the will of its constituents. And if you want to call it moving left, you can call it that. But I don't think it's that. I think it's just doing what people want. To an extent, Donald Trump proved that this is true by being the worst Republican for the Republican platform in 2016 and blowing right by 15 other candidates on promises that were far more populist, arguably to the left, than partisan along GOP lines.
Shit, I hate it when you use my own logic.
Now, that being said, millennials are the biggest voting bloc now. You think it was big in 2016? It's bigger now. They are less interested in the two-party system than ever. They are going to vote for whoever gives them the best reason to. And we already know what policies that voting bloc wants. If you can find a way to square that with older people by focusing on some of the stuff I mentioned earlier that polls well with moderates and even conservatives, that's how you're going to win. And in today's day and age, that means accepting policy proposals that have been pigeonholed as far left that are actually for everybody.
Well,
and with that, I rest my case.
Well, that just goes to show that the fastest growing, shiniest, throbbingest tumor on the cancer is definitely millennials. So.
That's fucked up, man.
I know, it's insulting to cancer.
Millennials are not going to vibe with that joke. But I'm going to leave it in. Some of them might.
Yeah, but what are they going to do about it? Oh, listen, Tumblr, I was offended.
Listen, Tumblr. Wow. To be honest with you, I don't know what they're using. I don't feel like they're using Facebook. They're using like Snapchat.
No, they're using other stuff. Like
they're using more like peer-to-peer.
They were using
stuff.
Tumblr. Well, Tumblr for a long time, and then that started dying out. And then they instituted the nudity ban, and then everybody, including hardcore right-wing perverts like me, stopped looking at Tumblr. Along with
there's no nudity on Tumblr.
Yeah, along with the leftists who wanted to be like, here's 55 opinions about politics and one testicle, because that's how I roll. And now you can't do that. And then we're like, well, then what's the point?
What's the point?
And so, Twitter is like really popular with this. This is why you don't like it, because
God,
you don't like the taste of cancer.
Yeah, I don't.
And reading Twitter is like eating cancer.
Oh my God, reading Twitter is like eating cancer. Wow. That's the thing that you've said that I agree with more than any other thing.
Out of all of my insensitive cancer analogies.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm going to stick by it. Hey, let's have a drink break, and then I want to hear what you think.
I love Twitter. I love Twitter, but I like going down to the most fucked up parts of San Francisco and Los Angeles and just watching. So there you go. Let's drink.
Cheers. All right. What you got to say about all that shit?
Well, got a couple bones to pick with this turkey.
Okay.
So look, I'm going to push back on the idea, this critique against me as being beheld to the two-party mindset. My argument is that the two-party mindset is an accurate reflection of the universal truth of all politics. There's only 4 basic alignments at the end of the day that every party in all politics falls into. Conservative versus liberalism, and then there's subordinate, moderate, and extreme wings. Like, that's it. All parties fall into that one way or the other.
Boo, disagree.
All political thinking, political movements, and political stances fall into one of those categories. And especially those parties that say that they're outside of the mainstream, right? Your libertarians, your socialists, they all say that their more mainstream component, the Democrats and the Republicans, doesn't go far enough. They all think that they're the true inheritors of liberalism or conservatism. Even when they disagree, it's because they think that, again, the major parties are too moderate. And this is sort of like the good thing about this is that it forces everybody into more of a moderate position by default. And the only reason why things don't fall into more passion and more chaos to the detriment of America is because of how we funnel things into this moderating force of the two parties.
All right. Well, then I want to give you one thing that I want you to fit into that claim.
What's that?
Republicans' conflicting sentiments on legalizing marijuana.
I would say that that's not conflicting. All you're seeing in that is that the whole country is moving in that way and that the Republican Party is moving along with it. And that's all. That's why Donald Trump is the person who, like for example, right? Like when you examine Donald Trump's positions on marijuana consistently, both in the election and for years as a private citizen before he ran for president, like he was always consistently like pro legalization for the most part. And every other candidate that ran in that election that he ran over, those 16 candidates, which we were laughing our asses off at 16 and now we're at 23 Democrats, right? He was the only one that was pro marijuana. And like a lot of people missed.
And he won.
He won. That's what I'm saying.
That's why I'm saying that these issues are not liberal versus conservative.
I think you're right. Okay, but here's what I'm saying. You're right, but that's just a fact that like this is becoming a former partisan issue that you guys just won. And that it was only erroneous thinking. Like nowadays, most people in the Republican Party and in conservatism as a whole are saying that when Republicans did not embrace it, that was erroneous anti-conservative thinking.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I mean, is that these things are not objectively conservative or liberal. They're just, how does the Democratic Party or the Republican feel about this thing in this moment in time? It's not objectively liberal.
I think,
that's what I'm saying.
We may agree on that.
Yeah, I think so, right? If we look at like marriage equality, right?
Right. That's
you could just as
issue.
easily, you could just solve the issue, and you could just as easily argue that it's a libertarian principle to allow marriage equality,
right?
As you could argue that it's some kind of like socially progressive liberal policy. You know what I mean? That's my whole point. Is like there's some of these issues that you can frame either way,
right?
Depending on like the taste of the moment of your team, you know?
Yeah.
And that the winner is going to be able to transcend that. That's my argument.
Right. But this just goes to uphold my argument that everything boils down to a left-right binary when it comes down to action day. And that as soon as the one side stops fighting, that the issue's over and it becomes massively solved. Like, it's ironic. I think a lot of us, myself included, thought that under Barack Obama, we'd finally see the end of marijuana as a Schedule I narcotic. And now we're realizing that might fucking happen if Donald Trump wins in 2020. You know what I mean? Him legalizing marijuana, or at least moving it down to Schedule II, would be an enormously progressive. And it's highly likely, like, you know what I mean?
It's possible. I mean, I think that we won't go too far down the rabbit hole, but I would be interested to see what he does if Congress passed comprehensive, swooping, just like take it off the fucking federal list, like whether he'd sign it or not. That'd be interesting to see.
And it's funny, like, we may or may not have mentioned this on the show, but it's worth mentioning in this context because it has direct bearing on the overall thing. Recently, in the last few months, Congress passed legislation that eased restrictions on banks that want to do business with marijuana dispensaries and made it easier through a series of measures in the same legislative package for marijuana businesses to operate on an interstate basis. And like, at least if you're not transporting marijuana, like we're we're not going to go after you for interstate crimes if you have 2 offices.
Right,
and even if you're, as long as you're sourcing it all in the same state. But just how you can get people together on that with a Republican president, with Republicans having equal power as Democrats in the overall legislative balance, like, it's insane that we haven't been able to just agree. Okay, why do we pass that weak sauce bill? Instead of just saying, okay, legalize it, or okay, move it to Schedule 2. Like, it's crazy as the schedule of narcotics goes. Like, if you just move things down one rung from the most severe and make it legally less legally dubious than cocaine.
You know, well, we're in the early stages of a huge shift, and it's nice that we can kind of see it happening, right? I remember in the early years of the Obama presidency being like, oh my God, we're in the early stages of marriage equality being the law of the land. You know, it took a few years, but it became the thing. I feel like once the American people are into it, and once it's like politically expedient to go ahead and do it, then it happens, you know? And I think that legalizing marijuana, it's just too practical, and it makes too much sense for them to not do it.
Especially against social libertarian issues. Like, I think that when things become true debates about economic balance, or things that have a real up, down, you know what I mean? Like taxes, like funding for government, size of government. You know, you'll still find people debating, going back and forth over the same spectrum over 100 years. There's so many issues that we've talked about in those aspects that have gone back and forth over the last 100 years, whereas like social issues, they just get their day in the sun and they tend to go in one direction without a lot of real pushback long term. But anyways,
except for abortion.
Well,
except for abortion, because abortion is a very polarizing thing.
But even still, like, this just goes to reflect that abortion is much more of a balance issue than it is like a true social libertarian issue. Because and we might be, I don't want to take it into too much of a tangent, but this is interesting, and it does have some bearing, because one thing that matters a lot in this upcoming election, even though national candidates won't explicitly mention it, is abortion, right? Like, these different moves at the state level in Georgia and Ohio to restrict abortion at unprecedented levels, it's going to make turnout surge on both sides, and it's going to drive both sides away from the center.
You know what? And that's why for the last 3 elections, I've voted, my primary voting issue has been the Supreme Court. And, well, hate to say I was right on that one.
You got Ruth Bader Ginsburg just doing everything she can not to die.
Oh, man. Stick with that row machine, girl. You got this.
Yeah, just don't get caught in it. Anyways.
She gets her dissent collar caught in the rowing machine.
Oh, man. I want to joke about that, but like, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Like, I don't want anything bad to happen to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Like, I want her to just one day, I want her to wake up tomorrow and be like, you know what? I should retire and get some like good quality time. I don't want her to like have anything bad happen. But look, getting back to the issue at hand, like, I want you guys to be totally like skeptical and be aware of the beguiling nature of polls. Like, almost every major political blunder that was an obvious overextension in its time was justified by someone saying the polls are with us, and now finally people have finally moved to our way of thinking. Like, this is where I remind you that the study design of most pollsters on the right and left is highly susceptible to confirmation bias. That's why true. Even when you have like pollster agencies that are considered the best in their field, like, you know, Rasmussen and all these other ones, right? Like
Gallup.
Gallup, like, they still, like, even when they're all doing what is considered the best polling data science, they still come up with wide enough variances that people are like, okay, what's the average of these polls, right? You have the Nate Silvers who are like, what are the averages? But
right.
They can still miss enormous things like they've done in the last few years, you know?
That's true.
And look, the media, right or left, selectively pushes any study that confirms their confirmation bias and adheres to their agenda. If you know that you just want to get your studies out there and advance your work, you're going to design your study to put out results that somebody wants to see so that people will pay you to do another study. I'm not saying that every study and poll is worthless. They have a lot of actual parsimony when you look at like their overall, but they're just polls. And, you know, no matter how scientific you try to make a polling of 1,000 people over the United States, our Electoral College, obviously, when you look at like election results that have, you know, flown in the pace of polls, the only poll that actually matters is the poll on election day, where people either show up or they don't,
Yeah.
And
I hear you. But at the same time, while that is true and it's a valid cautionary tale about polls, it doesn't go so far as being an argument that my arguments about what Americans care about are not true. You know what I mean? I think that it's still true that conservatives don't like it when rich people don't pay taxes, but poor people do. You know, regardless of you're right about polls, but I still think that there's at least some validity to my arguments about some of these issues are not far left issues, but that they are actually popular issues that are framed as far left issues.
Well, I would say that also at the same time, some of these issues are far left issues framed as popular issues. And that again, when you get to who's actually willing to turn out that.
What's an example?
So like
the Green New Deal,
like actually the inverse of what you said, like this notion that there's this problem where poor people are being taxed and rich people are not. Like when you consider that like a system that's based to tax you on your income above water makes sense, because if we can avoid taxing people and they can keep jobs on the books and they can keep their company going, and then they can turn it around and they can stop from creating that hole in the economy, like there's a value to that. Whereas like if taxes, you know what I mean? Like at the point of which you've generated so much wealth, right? Like it's your money to keep. And then the value of the economy to that on a consistent basis is not as unfair as you say.
Well, I think that's an intellectual tribal defense, but I don't think that that's reflective of where your average conservative stands on taxes. I think that
it's where your average conservative is, but I think I would say that the average American is not necessarily that hard right. Like they see a situation, right. Like I see a situation where I'm like, okay, well, you know, if you paid this much in state taxes, I don't have any problem with you writing off your federal taxes. You know what I mean? Because I realize you've already paid that tax, and you're already talking about, okay, yeah. So you know, poor person, like, you know, especially if you're at the poorest of poor.
Right. Well, the poorest of poor don't pay any taxes.
Yeah. But if you're at the poor, like let's say you're middle class, right, and you're paying, you know, the full rate, right?
Right.
But like, you know, you might balk at a rich person who's paying a lower rate, but that rich person has literally paid millions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, in theory.
And no, I mean literally. Like by the time that you're in that tax bracket, like you have paid millions. And even when we talk about tax breaks, that's like a sliding figure depending on the context. Where like, okay, you've given a $1 million break here, but then overall they're paying $10 million in taxes. And even when you talk about individuals and corporations that pay no federal tax, in a lot of instances, it's because they paid so much money at the state level, or they paid so many other taxes that are not a part of federal income tax. It's not like their tax liability is actually in the real world zero and that they end up paying zero. They just get a big break on an overall bill that, yeah, it sounds bad to give somebody $1 million break, but if he pays between federal, state, and municipal taxes $10 million, then it's not that big of a fucking break.
Well, I just want to point out that you're arguing that to me, but you're also arguing that to average Republicans who disagree with you and say
polling is not. No, I'm just saying.
I won't push too hard on that. But
no. I mean, you make a great point, and I actually think that you're right to push on it. I was just trying to get ahead to the point where I pointed out that like even when polls say, well, Republicans say this. And yet, again, the poll that matters the most, where they vote with their feet, they still elect certain people. And I think
that is true. You're right about that.
And again, I think that these polls, there's something to these polls. And yet, at the same time, these polls also, if these polls were so accurate and these numbers were so glaring, the Republican Party wouldn't look like it does. It would be the Democratic Party too. You know what I mean? Yeah, the point is that when push comes to shove, Republicans, especially depending on the way you phrase a question and depending on your sampling, you can produce numbers that say that, and they might be accurate for the way you've designed your study. But that doesn't mean that like we turn around and we actually advocate for that. And so, I mean, it becomes sort of an unprovable thing when you sort of cut it down to that. And yet I think that there's a lot of truth that gives validity insight to both sides when you cut it like that.
For sure.
So look, it's worth noting that we are only at a certain stage of the presidential primaries, which is before the first actual primary, like a while before the first one.
Yeah.
And one opponent will be leading for a while until actual primaries bear out the new crop of frontrunners. And when this transition happens, pretty frequently old frontrunners are often forgotten forever. Goodbye, Howard Dean. Goodbye, Jeb! Bush.
Goodbye, 2019 Joe Biden. Just a little wishful thinking.
Great
Not
point.
really.
No,
Whatever,
great point. Great point. Like, the proof is in who the American people keep electing, and polls that fly directly in the face of objective reality should not only be taken with a grain of salt, but like an entire salt lick meant for a pony, it might be more appropriate. This is why like so many people have embraced this like Donald Trump like fake news thing, because headlines like, oh, the polls are finally with us. There's no way a Republican can win. Demographics have changed too much. Like, I am so old enough to remember when people said that in 1996 when Bob Dole lost. And they're like, there's no way a Republican could ever win again. And then because that mentality was so rampant, when the 2000 election was so narrow, there's no way that people could accept it as legitimate. And then when it happened in 2004 and there was no question of the legitimacy, right? Like, it just fed into this split with reality, right? Like, it's true. We are a center-right country, and polls that are telling you that we've stopped being a center-right country, you know, they're the same people that told us that Trump was way too reactionary to overcome changing social attitudes in 2016. And instead, he beat the living shit out of Hillary Clinton in the electoral map.
Oh, for fuck's sake. All right. I got a couple things to say about this. One, speaking of horses, you talked about the horse salt lick. Some horse licked too much salt and is now dead because Kurt is beating the shit out of this dead horse. And I'm going to beat on it a little bit too when I say Hillary Rodham Clinton won the 2016 election, at least the popular vote, which didn't get her the presidency. She won the popular vote by 3 million fucking votes. And that's more or less undisputed right now, unless you're Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
3 million more people full of soy lattes charged out in Seattle and San Francisco and Los Angeles. That doesn't mean anything.
I don't care what kind of lattes they have. It's 3 million. And
I just also want you to know that, you know, I used to be into sadomasochism, bestiality, and necrophilia.
Okay.
But then I realized I was just beating a dead horse.
You've made that joke before. It's still got a chuckle out of it, though. Look.
Have I made it on the show, though?
Our standards have continually dropped, so maybe it'll make this episode.
All right. Honestly, it's just we talk too much about beating horses for me not to talk about my beat-offs.
Look.
My offbeat beat-offs.
And pointing out that, like, okay, look. Kurt argues, like, oh, Donald Trump beat the living shit out of HRC in the electoral map. First of all, he didn't beat the living shit out of her. I'm pretty sure like Obama beat Romney worse than Trump beat HRC. How much of a thrashing could it have been on the electoral map when Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in the popular vote by fucking double-digit margins, 3 million fucking votes?
Well,
Kurt makes the argument.
It's a lot, but it's also at the same time with the way that this country turns out, it was close enough in those states that to give you some credit back, like if Hillary had just gone to Wisconsin once.
Yeah, once maybe, or Michigan.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I'm with you there. But Kurt makes this assertion that the country is center-right, but I think that the fact that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million suggests that the country is center-left.
But again, this is out of an excess plurality only in coastal enclaves and blue enclaves, and not in the country as a whole. Well,
but even still, if we're talking, if one person, one vote means anything anymore, then it means
it never meant shit. The entire history of the United States for the presidents of the United States, it's never meant anything. This is something that liberals say when they're mad about losing an election.
I hear what you're saying, but I think that a person matters more than a cornfield. And you think, for some reason, that we should weigh the sentiment of America by geography, while I think that we should weigh the opinions of America by, I don't know, how many people feel certain ways.
Okay. Well, rather than respond to you, I'm going to actually say that that's the beginning of the argument on that. We did an episode on the Electoral College. Go listen to it.
Yeah, we did.
We're not going to argue about the Electoral College any more than that.
Yeah, it's a great episode. It's a
really good episode.
That being said, when I say that America is not center-right, it's actually center-left, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, because the way I actually feel is that there is no such thing as center. That the center...
That's a Good point.
The center is always changing. The center is whatever place gives a fair shake between to one side of it and to the other side of it to create about a 50-50 balance. That's what has allowed the two-party system to stay alive. The two-party system shifts all over the place. The center shifts in order to create that dividing line between right and left.
There's at least some truth to what you say.
Right. On many, many issues, you've seen the entire party on one side or the other completely flip to the other side, and what you call it realignment, right?
Well, they didn't.
Historically,
the entire party didn't flip, but what the truth is about realignment is that 2 or 3 issues do become free floating.
At any given time.
And then may be different from what each party had a couple years before.
Right.
And then that is enough to move people in both directions.
Well, right now we live in a two-party system that Kurt defends, but I say the two-party system is a system where we have these two behemoths, which is one is like a big blue D and the other is a big red R, and they both have power and they get to say what they are. And they're both constantly competing with each other to have more people or more of the right people under the big R or the big D. And they're free to change their perspective on anything to get more people. And they're more than happy to flip on any issue, especially when you're looking at the macro level of like keeping the apparatus alive of Republican or keeping the apparatus alive of Democrats, right?
They'll switch positions to keep the apparatus alive at any instance where the other option would be to have the apparatus die.
Yeah, at all costs.
If the other option is to have the apparatus die, they will switch the position.
So that's why I say, and for me, that's why I say that this is a farce, that what is right and what is left, right? We determine right and left based on the definitions that these apparatuses are choosing. But in reality, those definitions flip all the time. Marijuana is a good example. Even fucking marriage equality, to some extent, might be a good example. In 20 or 30 years, Republicans will be all the fuck about marriage equality. They might be all about fucking legalizing marijuana. They might say that legalizing marijuana was a Republican priority or something. You know what I mean? This shit changes. It's a complex system, but the whole overall point I'm trying to make is that what is the center and what is left even and what is right are shiftable. So maybe with that we can switch into some common ground.
So yeah, I definitely agree because there's some points that I wanted to agree with you on or even contrast with you where we don't totally agree, but we have some interesting alignment. So one of the things I wanted to note is that even though I do believe that the generality of what I said about America is true as far as being a center-right nation, and a lot of what the Democratic Party and liberalism is being into is way too extreme to the left for America, I still believe that. But it might be possible that both parties are too politically charged with partisan energy for any classic moderate to have any chance of getting nominated at all. Even if that nominee can or can't win the general. Like, I think that there's a lot to be said about things just being too charged. I mean, like when you look at the biggest donors and who's got the most energy, I go back and forth on whether or not I think Trump is a moderate or not. You know what I mean? But obviously the money and the energy is in the partisans.
Yeah, for sure.
and not the moderates, you know?
Yeah.
It could also be true that the Trump effect could work in an inverted fashion for Democrats, like sort of an extension of what I just said. A centrist nominee everyone in the electorate hates certainly could reduce in-party and general electorate tastes for a moderate from that party. Like, it stands to reason. Like, there's a lot of theories out there that Trump won because Republicans were disgusted with moderates and that moderates weren't delivering electoral success. Like when you look at the loss of moderate John McCain in 2008, the loss of moderate Romney in 2012, and that created like this Trump effect where they're like, well, fuck it. The moderates are never going to win anyway, so why compromise to lose? And so, and it worked very well for Republicans. It's not impossible. I mean, God knows I've seen crazier things, you know, than to be shocked if the same thing that happened and worked in Trump's favor worked in favor of a Bernie or a proto-Bernie candidate in 2024 or down the line. And, you know, I think that a far leftist winning the nomination and general only has the chance to be as shocking as Trump's win but not more shocking. As we've talked about earlier, I think that the cancer that is the millennial voting bloc taking predominance could be what changes everything, just like how the introduction of a virus into a healthy cell, whether this election or in the future, is what will destroy it. So,
well, we are in common ground, but I realize that I have not defended millennials, and I want to take a moment to say, millennials, you guys are right on a lot of these issues. As soon as you can figure out how to pay for all the shit you want, then I'm with you. I'm with you there. Let me at least say that when it comes to social issues, millennials are on the bleeding edge of making a lot of really, really important reforms to like the culture of our country and the social fabric of our country, and really creating equality and equity for every American. And I'm fucking grateful and on board for all of that progress. That being said, one of my big areas of common ground is that we cannot have at all. Big policies need funding. That's all there is to it, especially big government policies. And even though it's not like the GOP is fiscally responsible in the status quo, see Trump increasing the deficit by massive numbers, somebody is going to have to eventually be fiscally responsible.
Talk about moving to the center. Jesus Christ, Trump.
We on the left probably cannot afford to pass Medicare for all, forgive all student loan debt, make all college free, spend $2 trillion on infrastructure or $3 trillion, and hand out $1,000 a month in UBI to every American, and pass the Green New Deal, getting all cars off of fossil fuels in the next president's first year in office, no matter how popular free unicorns for every child is as a campaign promise. Then there's the whole problem of, well, Congress writes the lion's share of legislation, not the executive branch, and the Supreme Court is now stacked with partisan conservatives, so good luck with your weapons ban. So what's all of that boil down to? Well, maybe it's not a bad idea to have someone that's a little bit more of like a pragmatist in the captain's chair. Even if it is creepy Uncle Joe, I'll still rest easier knowing that a Democrat or a democratic socialist, I don't know, is holding the pen at the end of the day to say yes or no to the legislation that ultimately comes out of a more representative of the people Congress, in theory, as long as the Republicans don't gerrymander us into oblivion. So what can we agree on?
Well, certainly we could observe that each president spends their term doing things that they think the American people want, whether or not media or the other party thinks that that's what they want. And then if the people don't agree, they get voted out of office.
Well, hopefully.
But I think there's also an inverse to that, where it also, if we really wanted to step back from it, we could observe that the next president could spend their entire term doing just the things that pretty much all Americans want. And then it'd be great to think that they could find a way to avoid doing the things that polarize us. Although I don't want to sound like I'm singing an overrated song by a former Beatle.
I mean, I don't know. I'm refreshed by the idea of having a president that's like, their whole campaign is like, I'm going to look at the things that most Americans want, and I'm going to prioritize doing those things in order of how much Americans want them. You know what I mean? Like, I'd be like, all right, let's see what happens. Good luck contending with Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, I'm saying.
And I don't know whether that means that it's somebody pragmatic, like creepy Uncle Joe, or someone that's more like populist and focused on what I think of as transcendental issues like Bernie Sanders. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
And to me, that could be a good argument for getting someone in that is more practical. As much as Donald Trump got blocked by his own party from building his wall, you know, it's true that Elizabeth Warren would probably get blocked by Democrats from forgiving all student loan debt, especially if that plan was unfunded, which it most likely would be.
You know what? I never really thought about that, but you're right.
So thanks for listening.
Yeah. Share, comment, and like us on social media and find us on social media. Mike is Left Brain Mike on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you can't find him that way on Twitter, look for him as Mike Left Brain.
That's right. And Kurt is Right Brain Kurt on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
That's right. And the show's got accounts too, RBLB Pod on Twitter. And you can just look for the show under its name on Facebook and RBLB Pod on Instagram.
So until next week, don't do a front yard wheel alignment on your truck if one of your tires is flat.
Only borrow money from pessimists. They never expect it back.
Never make eye contact while eating a banana.
Unless you're at a sex club, in which case, always make eye contact while eating a banana.
And do yourself a favor and delete Twitter.
But if you're not going to do that, follow us on Twitter.
Yeah, RBLB Pod.
And retweet us heavily and talk about how great we are.
Until next week, bye.
Thanks for listening.
You're awesome. Right Brain, Left Brain is Mike Epley and Kurt Wagner.
The show is produced by Nick Minardi.
With graphics by Bianca Crampton.
And the RBLB theme song is by Dysonar.
Dysonar.
Who sometimes I call him Dysonar, sometimes I call him Dysonar. But he's always Arsenor. See you next week.
Bye.